My name is Damien, so I am the Client Success Manager here at BGL. Today's webinar will be focused on Simple Fund 360 with the share transactions side of things. So for those of you that attended the webinar last month, a couple of weeks ago, we focused on the bank transactions. If you weren't able to attend that webinar, there is a recording that will be available. We can send that as part of the email that gets sent with today's webinar's recording as well, so that you can catch up if you did miss that webinar last month. Now, just a bit of housekeeping just before we jump into things. So this webinar is being recorded. All attendees will receive a copy of the recording within a few days following the webinar today. If you do have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A section of your Zoom console. My colleague Cody is also part of the session. We'll be able to answer any sort of questions that you do have throughout the webinar. So today, as I mentioned before, so we're going to be looking at how to get share transactions into Simple Fund 360. So this is looking at a couple of the data feeds in particular. So the share data pack, which includes and consists of the contract note service and registry data service and the wraps and platforms. So again, last month we looked at the bank transactions. This month on today's webinar is looking at the share transaction side of things. And then in the June webinar, which will be next month in about 4 weeks' time, that will look at the smart matching once we've got all the transactions in Simple Fund 360. So with the BGL share data pack, so want to clarify and explain how this service works. Some clients do misinterpret it sometimes. We just want to clarify and explain what exactly the BGL share data pack is. Now, the share data pack, common sort of misconception is that it is the ASX share prices or share prices from the exchanges, which is not the case. The BGL share data pack is broken up into 2 different services. So we call it the contract note service and the registry data service, which we'll jump into shortly and explain what each of those 2 services are. But this is an additional cost to the base funds that you do have with Simple Fund 360. So again, last month, the bank data add-on was the first one. The share data pack is the second add-on, the second and only other add-on that we do have as part of the product. The pricing is the same as the bank data. So it is $40 per fund per annum, which can also be put onto monthly billing. If the service is taken up, there is a minimum of 5 funds, and then you can upgrade in lots of 1 fund thereafter. Okay, so you can check this from your feed management screen, which we'll go through shortly, if your firm has been subscribed to it. And if not, they can upgrade through My BGL. You can contact your firm's administrator or account owner to complete that upgrade to have the service as part of your subscription. Now, I've got a couple of help articles on here as well, which just goes through the supported brokers and registry data service and explains what they are. And we'll jump into that shortly though. But just explaining what the share data pack is and how it works. And then we'll also jump into the software and explain the setup process and how it looks when the data feeds are received in Simple Fund 360 as well. So again, the first part of the share data pack is the contract note service. Now, what this involves is the buys and sells that your clients, the trustees of a fund, have with their particular broker. So a common one is, for example, CommSec. So if a client has BHP shares or anything like that with CommSec that they buy and sell frequently, what happens is those clients would receive what we call a contract note or confirmation note. And that is what Simple Fund 360 uses to read and then import as a transaction into Simple Fund 360. So just a bit of a general overview as to what the process involves, and we're going to jump into the software shortly and see how this works. But the first step is to generate a set of broker instructions. Now, every broker is different, and the instructions for each of the brokers are also different as well. The instructions do have screenshots, and they explain to the client exactly what needs to happen to notify the broker of the email address from Simple Fund 360. So when you do set this up, that email address will be pre-filled on the broker instructions. So it allows you to easily print those instructions and provide it to the client. and then the client follows those steps to notify the broker of the email address. Now, with some of the brokers, it might be a phone call to notify them of the email address. It could be as simple as sending the broker an email and containing the email address from Simple Fund 360. They may need to log into their trading account to notify the broker of the email address, or they may need to fill in a form to notify the broker. So there's a few different ways of notifying the broker. Every broker is different, and they do specify those instructions on what needs to happen to notify them as part of the process. Once the broker has the Simple Fund 360 unique email address on their records, they will then begin to send the buy and sell contract notes to that email address. So what that means is the buy and sell confirmation notes would be emailed to the unique email address automatically by the broker. Simple Fund 360 will then read those contract notes that have been received and create a transaction and import that into Simple Fund 360 directly. Now we'll just jump into the software. Alrighty, so I'm in the feed management screen here at the moment. Now to set up the contract note service, so I'm in the connect menu within a fund, and then feed management here on the left-hand side from the side menu. And from here, I'm in the entity summary area. Now, this is looking at all of the data feeds for this particular fund, including the bank feeds, shared data, and wraps and platforms. But I can also go into the shared data global tab from here to see all of the funds and set up for all of the funds with the shared data pack. Now, in the top right-hand corner as well, so we can see how many funds are currently using that pack. And if you do have the service, the first number will be the number of ones that are remaining that haven't been used yet. And the second one in blue background is the number of subscribed funds that you do have as part of that service. Now, with the setup of the contract notes, so what we're going to do for this is we can see here in the shared data pack that there are two different lines for the contract notes and registry data. For the contract notes, which is what we're focused on first, what we would do is to click on the setup button on the right-hand side here. Now, from here, we have the option to select which brokers this fund has as part of their service. So with the brokers, there are over 150 brokers supported as part of the service. So for example, ComSec and a number of some of these other brokers. So the link that has a list of all of these brokers is available on our Knowledge Center, which will also be included in the email that you receive today. But these are some of the brokers. As I'm scrolling through this list, you'll probably recognize some of these broker names that your clients might be part of as well. So for this example, what I'm going to do is to select ComSec, and I'm also going to select another broker as well. So I'm just going to select Macquarie as well. Now you can have up to 10 brokers when you do set up the contract note service per fund. So 10 brokers per fund when you do set this up. The email address will be the same email address for all brokers that are set up for that particular fund as well. Now, in this particular option here, we've got forward all emails to. So from here, you have the flexibility to add in additional email addresses to receive a copy of these contract notes once Simple Fund 360 receives them. Now, a couple of different options with this. So some of the brokers allow only one email address to send the contract notes to, and it might be a limitation on their system. So in that case, what we would normally recommend is to provide the broker with the Simple Fund 360 email address that's been generated, and to then include the trustee's email address in this particular field here. So what that will mean is that anytime the broker sends a contract note to the Simple Fund 360 email address, it will automatically forward a copy of that to the client from here as well. Now, some accountants also pop in their email address. If you're doing daily processing, for example, you might choose to pop in your own email address into here as well. And then you will also receive a copy of those contract notes as well. Now, as part of the next steps, what we'll then do is to click on the instructions here for the broker instructions, and that will then download into a zip folder containing the broker instructions. Before I open those instructions, you can also generate a letter which just explains what the contract note service is to the clients, and you can provide a copy of this to them so that they understand what the service is and what exactly they are authorizing as well. So this is just an example of the cover letter, which can be customized as well. And I'll just open up the broker instructions from here as well. Okay, so on my screen here, we can see my the broker instructions that have been downloaded. So they are in a zip folder, so I've just extracted them here. Now we can see here the fund name. So you can generate this for multiple funds at the same time and enter in those brokers. Now with this one, so we've got the two brokers that I selected. So the first one being CommSec and the second one being Macquarie Online Trading as well. Now, if I open the CommSec PDF file, this is how the broker instruction, will look. Now we can see on here the unique email address, which has been automatically generated by Simple Fund 360 and has been pre-filled onto the broker instructions from here. And it just also summarizes the broker that has been selected, so CommSec. And this is what you would provide your client with to follow and notify that broker of this email address. So we didn't have to manually populate this at all. The Simple Fund 360 has automatically popped that onto the PDF file, which means that it's as easy as just printing this out and then providing it to the client. Now with CommSec, it does need to be done through online trading, like an online trading account. And from here, we can see step-by-step exactly what the client needs to do to notify CommSec of the email address generated by Simple Fund 360. So we've also got the screenshots in here as well, which makes it very easy for the client to follow along and make sure that they don't miss any steps at all to provide the email address to the broker. Now, if I open the instructions for Macquarie Online Trading, it will have the same email address on this particular one here as well. But we can see that there's no additional pages in this particular file. To notify Macquarie of it, we can see the instructions on this particular first page here. We can see that a phone call, for example, is required to Macquarie directly to notify them of the email address. So you can see that every broker is different in their authorization process. So it is important to make sure that the instructions on the broker instructions are correctly followed by the client to notify the broker of the email address. We can see that also the email address has been saved in this particular screen from here, and then I can click on the save button. Now, if I need to add additional brokers, I can go back into the edit record screen and add in those brokers from here as well and generate those instructions to be provided to the client to notify those brokers of the email address as well. Now, once the broker has updated their records to include that email address, they will then begin to automatically send those contract notes to Simple Fund 360. Now, that might happen, for example, overnight, where the email will be received from the broker. Simple Fund 360 will then automatically read that contract note, which does need to be the original PDF file that the broker automatically sends. And it would then be imported as a transaction in Simple Fund 360. So if I just jump into one of my funds from here, in the transaction list from here, we can see a couple of examples. So I can see that from, for example, these reference numbers, but also from the description here. So we can see a purchase of Link Market Services, administration holdings from here. We've got a buy and also a sell as well. Now, what happens as part of that process as well is that the contract note that the broker sends is automatically attached to the transaction. So you've got that full history and source document evidence. Now, by having that source document and the contract note automatically attached here, it also will flow through to the work papers screen. So if you're using the work papers module in Simple Fund 360, you'll be able to see that particular contract note as part of the source document evidence as well. So we can see this particular contract note, which is where those details have been read and imported into Simple Fund 360. And the same with also the sell here. So we've got that buy and sell, which have been automatically received and processed in here. Now we'll touch on this more next month as well, but you can see that this particular fund has the bank feed set up and also the share data set up, and these transactions have been automatically matched. But again, we'll go through this more next month, but we can see, starting to see the benefits of having both services and data feeds set up allows you to process an SMSF faster, and also with Simple Invest 360 as well. So that was the first part of the service. So looking at the contract note service, which is looking at the buys and sells for any shares on the ASX listed securities there. The second part of the service is the registry data service. Now, some clients we see are using either the registry data service or contract note service. With the registry data service, this is looking at 3 particular providers. So the first one being Computershare, second one being Link Market Services, and the third one being Boardroom as well. Now, with these 3 providers, so what you might be currently doing is going to the registry provider's website and entering in that HIN and postcode and security code for each individual security manually. Now, if a fund has, for example, 20 investments, that could take a few hours of manually checking to make sure that you've got the correct holding balances in Simple Fund 360. But with this particular service, similar to what you are doing on that provider's website by entering in the HIN and postcode, but what needs to happen is that the HIN and postcode is entered in once into Simple Fund 360, and we will then receive a quarterly holding balance automatically from those 3 providers. So it saves you time having to go to that provider and manually entering that HIN and postcode for every security. You enter it in once in Simple Fund 360, and those balances will flow through into Simple Fund 360 directly. We'll go through and explain the setup process shortly, and also how that data flows into the balance review screen. But the quarters that are available are also listed on the screen here. So the 31st of March, the 30th of June, 30 September, and 31st of December. So the most important one is probably 30 June, which allows you to make sure that the holding balances in Simple Fund 360 reconcile with the third-party registry provider. But you do also have the ability to see other quarters as well. So that's really useful for being able to see a movement from one quarter to the other, so that you can see if the client has traded and maybe there's a transaction missing. So it narrows it down to, for example, that particular quarter, as opposed to checking the whole financial year and making sure that you have all of the transactions. Now, with the registry data service as well, you do receive historical balances for the last 4 quarters from when you do enter in the HIN and postcode into a fund in Simple Fund 360. So for example, if I was to enter in one today, I would still be able to receive the 30 June 2021 holding balances in Simple Fund 360. And obviously the 2021 SMSF annual return is due in shortly as well, in the next couple of weeks. So you can still receive those holding balances if you were to enter it in today as well. Now we'll just jump into the software. Okay, so I'm back in my fund from here. I do have 2 examples of funds, one with some data and one that I can play around with to set up as well. So with this particular one, looking at the same fund from earlier, so we've got the registry data service here. And what we do is we click on the setup button here on the right-hand side. And then at the top here, we can enter in the HIN and postcode. So it's normally a number that's normally starts with an X or an I. So you can enter in that HIN or SRN from here. So I just want to pop in some dummy details for the moment. And then we pop in the postcode as well. And then from here, I can easily apply to all of the securities in this particular fund. So we can see that now on the right-hand side, the HIN has been applied to all of these securities that are held by that particular fund. Now, a common question that we do also receive is whether you can add multiple HINs, and you definitely can. So if the fund has two members and they're potentially segregated investments, you can enter in both HIN and postcodes for each of the two members into here and apply that to all of the funds. So all of the investments within the fund. Within the balance review screen, it will also be split. So you can see the individual holding balance for each HIN or SRN number as well as the total to make sure that everything does reconcile. If there are particular investments that have a second HIN or SRN number, you can enter them in from here as well, which will only add it for that particular investment as well. Now, once those details have been entered in, we'll then click on the Save button. And what will happen is Simple Fund 360 will request the holding balances for the last 4 quarters from those 3 registry providers. Now, once they have been received, to see the reconciliation of those balances, we would go into the investments area on the left-hand side and then select Balance Review. Now, in this particular screen, so we can see a few details from here. So this allows you to see the balances from the third party, for example, with bank accounts and also with the 3 providers, registry providers as well. So in this example, we can see the HIN or SRN number has already been entered in here. It has been masked for security reasons as well. We can see that where the data has been received from, so which particular provider that investment is on, and the date as well. And obviously the most important detail is also the balance as well. So this is looking at the holding balance of AMP, for example, on this particular HIN or SRN with Computershare. So Computershare is saying that for this particular holding reference, that there is 3,085 units on hand on their end of AMP. So we can see those details from this particular column over here. And this particular fund is a brand new one in Simple Fund 360, which is why we've got a 0 balance. So we can see here that that's why there is a variance of 3,085. So in Simple Fund 360, there is no record of the fund holding AMP shares at all. So it's got that 0 here. But what I can do, for example, if I was to add a transaction, so I can add a journal entry. I'm just going to pop in a dummy one for the moment. So just pop in AMP. So just post this particular transaction. Yep, so that's my dummy one that I'm going to post now. And then if I navigate back to the balance review screen, we can see that balance is now entered in here. So we can see now that we've got those 3,085 corresponding with the balance in Simple Fund 360, and the variance is now zeroed out from here. Now, just to reiterate, so it is just the balances that we do receive. It's raw data, not any sort of dividend statements or anything like that from those providers. If there is a variance, like I mentioned before, you would need to determine from this screen. You can see that which ones do have that variance from here. And the intention is to make sure that they are zeroed out and all transactions have been correctly entered into Simple Fund 360. But you can see those variances and reconcile to make sure that these balances do match with the one in Simple Fund 360. So again, just looking at this, so in this particular example, we have got these balances already in the balance review screen from here. But if we were to do this on the registry provider's website, it would take us probably at least half an hour, even for that number of investments, to type in the HIN and postcode, check the balance and enter in that annoying security code every time, and then to also cross-check it against the general ledger in Simple Fund 360 to make sure that the balances do reconcile. But again, just by simply entering in the HIN and postcode or SRN number into the feed management screen once, we've got those balances pulling through, including the last 4 quarters. And Simple Fund 360 does all the hard work in comparing that balance with the one general ledger in 360 and shows you that variance from here. These links are also hyperlinked. So if I was to click on any of these, it would go straight into the transaction list where you can see the ones and make sure that they have been correctly entered in. Now, also in the balance review screen, we can see we've got TLS here. So off the top of my head, that is Telstra. There isn't an investment in here at all. And it is in sort of black or gray font with no link in Simple Fund 360 at all. Now, with Link Market Services and Boardroom, what they will actually send is, even if you pop in the HIN and postcode once into the fund, if the investment is not already attached to the fund in Simple Fund 360, they will still send the balances across. So unfortunately, Computershare doesn't do that, but Link Market Services and Boardroom will send the holding balances for all investments for that holding reference number, regardless of whether it's held or not in Simple Fund 360. So this is also another good way to make sure that you do have all of those transactions within the software and all investments as well. So the client may not have provided you with the contract notes or details for Telstra, but Link Market Services has told us that there is 756 units on their end for that particular holding reference number. So that allows you to go back and review the financials and the data provided by the client. And there's probably at least one transaction. There could be sells happening as well. So just to make sure that all of those transactions have been correctly recorded within Simple Fund 360 from here as well. Now, if I go back into the feed management screen, we'll just jump back into our slides as well. And we're just going to touch on, now we've gone through how does the share data pack work. So again, it consists of the contract note service, but also the registry data service. So it's not your ASX prices or anything like that. They're 2 different services and data feeds coming from different places. We've got, with the contract note service, it is the brokers, and with the registry data service, it's coming from Computershare, Boardroom, and Link Market Services. Now, a common question that we do receive from clients, and we do notice a bit of a trend in this, is with how they are set up. So if a fund is set up for the contract note service, it takes up 1 spot. If it's set up for the registry data service only, it takes up 1 spot. If it is set up for both, it still takes up 1 spot. So what that means is that if you do have any funds already set up on the contract note service or registry data service, is to look at setting up the other one as well, because you're already paying for that particular fund in the share data pack. If it's not something that you've already set up and it's the first time you are seeing the share data pack, then definitely consider looking at the setup for both of them as well at the same time, because you're already paying for that particular fund space. Now, one other thing to also touch on with the billing side of things with the share data pack is that you don't have to subscribe for the share data pack for all of your funds. So we do see a number of different combinations, and depending on how many investments the client has, if they've got a property, for example, and that's the only investment that they have, then there's probably no use in setting up the share data pack for that particular fund. But if there are a number of investments and the client does frequently trade it, or there is hundreds and hundreds of investments, then the share data pack sells itself, I guess, and allows you to have those data feeds flowing through to Simple Fund 360 automatically. So again, just to reiterate that if a fund is set up on either of the 2 or both, it only takes up 1 fund, and you can pick and choose which funds are set up on that service. So just as an example to clarify exactly how the billing side works. So let's say, for example, I have 100 funds on Simple Fund 360. We might have, for example, 80 of those funds set up for the bank feeds. The other 20 don't have many transactions, so we manually or use SmartDocs or CSV to enter them in. We might have, for example, 50 funds that have a number of investments, share investments. So I would set up the 50 funds and pick and choose which ones they are to set up the share data pack for. So even though I manage 100 funds and 80 of them are set up for the bank data, I don't need to set up the share data pack for all 80 or 100 even. We can pick and choose. The minimum is 5 funds, but then afterwards you can upgrade in increments of 1 fund thereafter as well. Now within the feed management screen in Simple Fund 360 from here as well, we can see, if I go into the Share Data Global area, we've got a number of filters that are available here and across all the funds that have been set up for the Share Data Pack. Now, if I was to click on, for example, registry only, we can see which funds have been set up for the registry data service only, and the same with the contract note service only as well. So these are really good filters to look at. So if you've already got the Share Data Pack and you're maybe using one or the other, have a look at these filters from here, because with these ones, we can see that all of these funds listed here are currently using the contract note service, but not the registry data service. So we're already paying for these funds for that contract note service. So we may as well add the registry data service because we're already paying for it, but also to receive those holding balances from those registry providers as well. There are a couple of other filters over here that we can see towards the right-hand side. So if you've got more funds set up for both services, that's great. Probably where you want to see that number increase. The awaiting activation refers to the contract note service, which means that the email address may not have been provided to the broker yet. So this is how you can follow up to make sure that once you have provided your client with a copy of the broker instructions, that they have followed the instructions carefully. If it still says awaiting activation, what that means is that the email address that has been generated has not received any emails from the broker. Now, we also you might see some clients that may not trade frequently as well. So how do you know whether the client has actually provided the email address to the broker and followed the instructions carefully? So to do this, we can see that there is another status here that says awaiting first trade, which is different to awaiting activation. So what that means is that if there is a fund in awaiting activation, no emails have been received to the unique email address in Simple Fund 360. If we see any funds sitting in the awaiting first trade, what that means is that an email has been sent to the email address, but it wasn't a buy or a sell contract note. So it may have been a marketing email, for example, from the broker. But because an email has hit the email address in Simple Fund 360, someone knows about that email address, which is usually the broker. So it means that the client may not have traded yet, and they may not trade frequently, but the broker has the email address recorded on their end. So it means that they have notified the broker of the email address. So it saves you time having to work out whether or not the broker has been notified. This has also been a recent change that we've done in the last year or two. So for those clients that have seen it in the past, we now track, for example, any emails that have been received, for example, those marketing emails. Now, if you want to see any funds and which funds have been set up for the share data pack and even the bank feeds as well, you can go into the advanced options and reports, and then you can generate a license report, which will indicate all the funds that have been set up for the bank feeds and also the share data pack, so that you can reconcile and work out disbursements back to the client, for example, as well for those data feeds. And again, so anytime that you do filter anything on the screen here, so for example, I'm in the share data pack and looking at the ones that are awaiting activation only. So these have been set up, we're paying for them, but they aren't receiving any data feeds yet. You can, for example, just export this from the advanced options area by clicking on export current view, and that will generate into an Excel spreadsheet. And if you've got multiple client managers, you can work out which client managers need to follow up with those clients to make sure that they are completed, like the clients have been completing the instructions and notifying the broker. So that is the share data pack. So I'm just going to move on to the wraps and platforms as well. Now, with the wraps and platforms, one thing to make clear with this is that it is free. There is no additional charge for any funds that are set up on the wraps and platforms service. So if you've got a fund on Simple Fund 360, you can set up a data feed with the wraps and platforms at no additional cost. It's already on the software. This is free. Now, with some of these wraps and platforms, I'm going to open the summary of them and list out the ones that are available. But some of them are, ComSec is one of them as well. So ComSec Retail, for example, Hub24, Macquarie Wrap, BT Panorama as well. There's just a few to list out there. And what the wraps and platforms feeds allows you to do is to receive bank transactions, investment, and income transactions. Now, each provider does vary. Some provide all three. Some will provide maybe one or two of these types. But they do, most of them do also provide historical data as well, especially the big ones as well. So what that allows you to do is that if you are currently processing a fund and you haven't set up any of the data feeds yet, but a fund has, for example, a portfolio with BT Panorama, you can set that up and also receive historical transactions. So again, just reiterating from the last webinar when we looked at the bank data side of things, most of the banks only provide the transactions from the approval date. But with the wraps and platforms, we can see a number of the providers listed here. We can see which types of transactions they do support in sending to Simple Fund 360 and whether historical data is also sent. So I'll just scroll through this list and you can be able to see some of the providers that are listed here on the left-hand side in determining whether some of your clients have a portfolio with those particular providers. Now, some of these providers can be set up at an advisor level. So if you have an in-house advisor, they would be able to set up the data feeds and the authority to receive the data feeds in Simple Fund 360. And some of the providers will also have ones that can be set up at a client level as well. Some will also have both client and advisor. Each provider is different, so it is important to review the help article, which goes through the setup process for those particular providers. So if I was to open up the BT Panorama article, we can see the authority process is listed out here. And we can see that it can be done at an advisor level. So the advisor can send the authority, or the client can also send the authority to BT. So that's just one example of the providers. Each provider is different, so it is important to make sure that you do review the instructions for that particular provider. And we will include these links as well so that you can access them when the email with the recording has been sent out as well. Within Simple Fund 360 in the wraps and platforms screen, this is where those data feeds sit, and you can set up those ones from here as well. So we can see, for example, Prestone has been set up in the fund that I was looking at earlier. And we can see the other ones with BT Panorama, for example, as well. So this particular screen allows you to set up those data feeds for any ones that are on the wraps and platforms. Now, we've gone through the bank data in a couple of weeks ago in the last webinar. We've gone through the shared data today, and we've also looked at the wraps and platforms. So there are three sort of main areas of where we get data feeds from, looking at various different purposes as well. So one of the things to look at is to look at your funds and review what data feeds and institutions or brokers that they are with. So it is important, I do usually recommend to clients to have a look at it. So what bank accounts do they have? Which financial institutions do they have a bank account with? Is there one with Westpac? Is there one with, for example, CBA? Who is the broker with? Is it with ComSec? Do they have any portfolios, for example, with BT Panorama? Every fund is different. So it is important to have a look at each one and work out what sort of accounts they do have. Now, you'll notice also a bit of a overlap or crossover with the bank transactions and investments here. So some of you may be looking at this and seeing that there's bank transactions which would come through from the bank feed and investments transactions that might come through from the contract note service. So they also come through with the wraps and platforms if it is part of the same portfolio. Again, some clients and funds will have different setups, so it's important to take a look at this. Now, if a fund only has a portfolio with BT Panorama that we looked at earlier, then there may not be a need to set up the bank transactions or investment transactions or contract note service if they only have a portfolio with BT Panorama, because otherwise that would be a duplication, and the wraps and platforms is also free as well. So you wouldn't need to pay any additional fees to have the BT Panorama feed operating in Simple Fund 360. So 2021 is obviously due in the next week or two, but it's important to take a look at this as soon as possible as well and see which data feeds should be set up for the funds and making sure that they are done as soon as possible, so that especially the ones with the bank feeds and even the shared data pack, that they are flowing through from the 1st of July as well. With the wraps, again, some of them do provide historical data, but it's still important to check the setup of each of the funds and what sort of accounts they do have, because they may not have one with one of those portfolio providers. Now, we've looked at more of the automated data feeds that are available with the share data pack, which is an add-on, additional cost, but the wraps and platforms as well, which is free of charge for any funds that are on Simple Fund 360. If you don't wish to set it up for the share data pack or the wraps and platforms, a couple of other options to get your share transactions into Simple Fund 360 is to look at the broker CSV import that is available similar to a bank CSV, but with the columns related to a broker. Or you can also use the BGL XML upload as well. So there are a couple of other options. Unfortunately, we don't have time to go through all of that today, but those are a couple of other options that you do have to also set up as well. But as always, to get the most out of the software is to set it up with the data feeds, which will allow you to have that continuous and automation with those data feeds flowing through into Simple Fund 360 directly as well. So these sorts of transactions without having to manually enter in or import manually as well. Now, just before we wrap up, a couple of things. So if you do have any sort of further questions regarding the data feeds, you can get in touch with the BGL support team and data services team. You can use the live chat and support call functions that are available within Simple Fund 360. If you do require any sort of additional information in relation to, for example, today's webinar or any other resources and webinars that we have previously run as well, these can also be found on the BGL YouTube channel. The learning channel is a great resource for new users as well. So if you are new to the software and becoming familiar with the screens, there are a number of pre-recorded videos that you can access in the learning channel. And of course, the BGL community as well, where there are a number of clients that discuss various things, but it is also the place where our product team pops in the release notes with any new features and data feeds and that are available within the software. Now, the next webinar that we do have is on the 9th of June, and that will look at the smart matching screen and how we can process an SMSF. So again, in the April webinar, we looked at how to get bank transactions into Simple Fund 360. Today, we've looked at how to get the share transactions into Simple Fund 360. So now that we've got our data and bank and shared investments into the software, we're ready to start processing a fund. So that's what we'll be looking at next month in this smart matching webinar. Gave a bit of a glimpse before with the automation side of things with the bank and investment transactions automatically matching, but we'll look at the smart matching screen in more detail next month. So definitely register for that webinar if you haven't already. So that does bring us to the end of the webinar. So I just wanted to say on behalf of BGL, a very big thank you for attending today's webinar. If you have missed any parts of this, we will be sending through a recording with the copy of the slides as well. So you will receive that within a few days. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to the BGL team. We're more than happy to help. And we'll see you at the next webinar in 4 weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.